That is where our story begins, with a question whispered across the void, in the dim hours before dawn, when even the most battle-hardened worlds rest in uneasy quiet. For in that thin sliver of stillness lies a truth few dare to contemplate, the truth that the Orks, the green-skinned tide of brutality and madness, were never meant to be understood, only endured. And yet, tonight, you will follow a path few have walked and even fewer have survived. The winding, violent, strangely hypnotic saga of the Orks. Not the version told in cold, sanitized records, but the deeper, older truth, the story buried beneath layers of spores, war cries, and blood-slicked soil. It is a tale that stretches farther back than the rise of the Imperium, farther back than human memory, back to a time when the galaxy was young and the gods of war were sculpting their perfect soldiers. To understand them, you must step into the stillness of a forgotten age, long before the first Waaagh echoed across the stars. It was an age forged by the ancients, beings of impossible power who shaped life as casually as sculptors shape stone. And in that primordial twilight, they crafted something monstrous. Something unstoppable. A species designed with one singular purpose: to fight, survive, and multiply until the stars themselves trembled beneath their boots. The Orks did not evolve. They were built, every muscle, every instinct, every wild, roaring impulse woven deliberately into their being. Imagine a creature whose very biology demands conflict, whose thoughts burn with the constant need for battle like a furnace that never cools. Their minds are wired not for peace, not for reflection, but for the ecstatic madness of unending war. And yet, beneath that savagery lies a strange sort of order, a brutal simplicity that gives them their uncanny resilience. A single spore drifting on a breeze can become an entire tribe. A single roar can become a full-blown Waaagh. A single orc, alone in the void, can rebuild a warband from nothing. It is this strange paradox, the blend of violence and simplicity, brutality and instinctive organization, that makes them impossible to eradicate. You can burn them, cut them, bombard them from orbit. But something in the galaxy itself seems determined to keep them alive, as if the stars whisper their name in secret admiration. The Orks, for all their savagery, are a kind of cosmic joke played on every civilized species. The unstoppable force that no empire, no matter how proud, can ever fully extinguish. Tonight's chronicle begins not with a king or a prophet, nor with some legendary warboss known across the stars. No, we begin with something far humbler, because that is where all Orc stories truly start. Our journey opens on a forgotten world at the edge of imperial maps, where ancient wars left the soil cracked, blackened, and bare. For centuries, the planet slept beneath layers of ash and silence. No birds, no beasts, no wind, a dead world by every measure. Until the spores arrived. They drifted in on the solar winds, microscopic and harmless, carried from some distant battlefield where Orks had died laughing in their final blaze of violence. They settled into the cracks of the earth, waiting, dreaming, drinking in the lingering warmth of the sun. And in time, as always happens where Ork spores find purchase, the soil began to change. First came threads of fungal growth, pale and thin like the fingers of awakening ghosts. Then thicker strands, pulsing with life. The ground itself seemed to breathe, exhaling a faint green mist that shimmered beneath the sun. Days passed, weeks. Then came the sound, a wet, cracking pop beneath the surface, the first heartbeat of new Ork life. The earth parted. Small, squirming shapes crawled from the soil, their skin pale and soft like newborn animals. These were the earliest grots and snotlings, simple-minded, instinct-driven creatures whose existence was nothing more than the first step of Ork creation. They chittered, sniffed the air, and scrambled across the burned terrain in search of something to gnaw, something to steal, something to hoard. They were harmless, for now, because from the same soil, deeper still, the true forms were gestating, larger, stronger, the embryonic hearts of the tribe yet to come. Above ground, the planet remained silent, unaware of the storm gestating beneath its dead surface. But the spores knew. The fungus knew. The planet itself, scarred by centuries of old wars, seemed almost to shudder in anticipation. This is how an Ork empire begins, not with banners, not with roaring engines, but with spores silently claiming a world 1 inch at a time. And on this forgotten, dust-choked planet, something different was stirring. A peculiar warmth in the soil, a strange resonance in the air, as if the spores here had awakened with an unusually fierce hunger, a particularly brutal spark. Something old, something rare, something dangerous, even by Ork standards. For among the growing forms beneath the earth, there was one whose presence overshadowed the others. A shape larger, denser, pulsing with latent violence. A future warboss, still sleeping in the darkness like a weapon waiting to be wielded. His heartbeat was slow, heavy, and thunderous, a rhythm that made the ground tremble ever so slightly. Tonight, you will follow his rise. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the soil, he sleeps. And with every beat of his forming heart, the planet itself seems to whisper a warning. The silence will not last. The stillness will soon break. The green tide is waking. And when it does, the galaxy will remember this world's name. That is the question that lingered over the dead world as the spores continued their silent conquest. The planet, long forgotten on the farthest edges of star maps, had been a graveyard for centuries, but now, it stirred with a pulse that did not belong to it. And that question, that subtle whisper of dread, is exactly what pulls you deeper into this story. If you stay with me until the very end, you'll uncover a truth about the Orks that most lore never dares to explain. A truth buried in their origins, in their instincts, and in the strange, terrifying design that makes them the most unstoppable force in the galaxy. That reward is waiting for you, but only if you follow the story to its final words. For now, we return to the quiet world and its changing soil. Days passed, and the fungal forests thickened, creeping over the charred ground like a slow-motion wave of infection. The grots continued scurrying across the landscape, arguing in their squeaky, frantic voices over scraps of fungus and bits of stone they believed to be treasure. They were the comic prelude to the tragedy of violence that was soon to come, the soft rustle before the thunderclap. But beneath them, the heartbeat of something massive echoed. The forming warboss, the one whose slumbering presence radiated dominance even before he had taken his first breath, began to stir. The ground bulged above him, swelling with each pulse from below. Even the grots, as dense and distracted as they were, stopped to stare at the trembling soil. Their instincts, simple as they might be, warned them of what lay beneath. Not a predator, not a danger, but something far more important. A leader. The first fissure cracked open like a single strike of lightning across the barren plain. A deep, guttural growl spilled out from within, rolling across the wasteland like distant thunder. The grots scattered, shrieking and tripping over themselves as the earth split wide, releasing a cloud of warm, green vapor. It drifted upward and stretched outward, carrying with it the scent of raw fungus, sweat, and embryonic aggression. Then came a hand, thick, muscled, larger than any grot's entire body. It clawed its way into the open air, dragging up a mountain of a creature whose skin glistened with moisture and whose eyes snapped open with a fury as old as the galaxy. He was born fully grown, as all Orks are, but there was something sharply different about this one. His gaze wasn't just hungry for a fight, it was calculating, almost curious in its brutality, as if he sensed a destiny waiting for him beyond the horizon. The world had given birth to its first true Ork, and he wasted no time making himself known. With a guttural roar that shattered the quiet sky, he stood tall on the broken ground, fists clenched, teeth bared in a savage grin. His voice echoed across the plains, rippling through the fungal groves and vibrating through the soil. It was the sound of power asserting itself instinctively, a declaration that even the wind seemed to bow before. Grots returned cautiously, drawn by instinctual recognition. They clustered around him, staring up with wide, fearful admiration. They sensed it instantly. This was a being they would follow, whether out of loyalty or terror hardly mattered. He knew it too. Power for an orc is not given. It is taken, claimed, and proven by the simple reality that others cannot deny it. He turned toward the horizon, as if he could feel the weight of the galaxy waiting for him. Battlefields not yet soaked in blood, stars not yet conquered, enemies not yet crushed beneath his boots. A warboss might be born with no memories, but he awakens with a single instinctive truth. The universe exists to be fought. And thus, the silence of the dead world was broken forever. The fungus grew faster. The grots multiplied. The air thickened with the smell of raw growth and potential violence. Soon, more orcs would crawl from the earth, boys, knobs, mech-minded prodigies, all triggered into awakening by the presence of their towering progenitor. A tribe was forming. A Waaagh was gestating. And the galaxy, distant and unsuspecting, had no idea that its next nightmare had just opened its blood-red eyes. That is the sensation that spread across the dead world in the days after the first orc tore himself from the soil. It was subtle at first, a faint vibration, a low hum, the kind of tremor that makes animals flee long before danger arrives. But this planet had no animals left. Only fungus, and the things awakening within it. The great warboss, still unnamed but already towering and broad-shouldered, stalked the blackened plains with a predator's ease. Every step he took seemed to energize the ground, as if the world itself recognized the brutal significance of his birth. The air trembled around him, tinged with the heavy scent of spores and unformed muscle. The grots followed in a trembling swarm, chittering nervously, bumping into each other, clutching scraps of fungus as if those scraps offered protection. They knew, somehow, that he was the beginning. But even he was not prepared for the speed at which the world responded. The soil cracked again, once, twice, then dozens of times. Thin seams of green light pulsed beneath the crust-like veins just beneath the skin. The warboss stopped walking, shoulders lifting as instinct warned him of something immense unfolding. He tilted his head, jaw jutting forward, listening to the underground groan. What rose next was not a single orc. It was dozens. The earth split open like a vast wound, and from the depths came the thunderous echo of bodies forcing their way upward. Boys, large, muscular, snarling, erupted from the cracked surface in bursts of soil and spores. Their eyes opened to the harsh light with immediate aggression, teeth bared, fists already clenching tight. They roared simply because breathing wasn't dramatic enough. And the moment they saw the warboss, their instinct tightened like a trigger. They didn't know why they followed him. They didn't need to know. Their minds were born with the truth carved into them. There must always be someone bigger. Someone stronger. Someone to lead the Waaagh. More bodies tore free. More roars shook the plains. The sound became a wall of noise, a tide of green muscle and violence flooding into existence. Within hours, the barren world hosted a small but unmistakable orc tribe. Dozens of boys, clustering around their massive leader, forming a loose circle as they waited for him to make a move. For orcs do not simply breathe their first breath and wander aimlessly. Their purpose is immediate. Their instincts demand structure, even if that structure is crude and enforced with fists. The warboss lifted his head again, sniffing the air. Something was calling to him. Not a voice, not a scent, something deeper, a pull from the horizon, as if the very planet whispered of materials, ruins, and remnants that might one day become tools of war. For an orc, the distant unknown is never frightening. It is a promise. He marched forward, and the tribe followed with thunderous footsteps. Their boots cracked dried bones hidden beneath the soil. Fungal strands snapped under their weight. Spores burst in little clouds, feeding the atmosphere with the promise of more life, more orcs, more noise. As they traveled, more boys clawed their way out of the dirt. Some emerged half-grown, still shaking fragments of soil from their backs. Others rose fully formed, shouting challenges to the sky before they even understood what a sky was. A few grots scampered in their wake, gathering anything shiny and fleeing at the slightest hint of a snarl. The tribe grew as they walked. The Waaagh was not yet a roar, but it was becoming a rumble, a low, steady vibration building behind the warboss like a gathering storm. And the world began changing in response. The blackened soil brightened with green veins as fungi spread faster than vegetation should ever spread. Cliffs crumbled under the weight of orc growth. Rivers of spore-laden moisture pooled in low valleys. Even the air thickened, heavy with the musk of rising muscle and instinctual aggression. Something monumental was coming, something the galaxy would one day name, something the Imperium would one day fear, something that begins, always, with a leader and his tribe walking across a world that cannot contain them. The warboss paused when he reached the edge of a wide, cracked canyon that cut across the land like a scar. He stared down into the darkness below, not with hesitation, but with the understanding that whatever lay within was meant for him. The boys crowded behind him, ready, eager, restless. For the first time since his awakening, the warboss spoke a word, a low, rough sound that scraped out of his throat like a stone dragged across metal. Down, and they obeyed without question. The green tide descended into the canyon, unaware that at its deepest point lay the first true artifact that would shape their rising empire. The thing that would give them purpose. The thing that would give them identity. The thing that would make this tribe the seed of a future Waaagh. So large the stars themselves would shudder. The orcs had awakened. Now, they were about to discover why. That was the feeling that settled over the orc tribe as they descended into the canyon. The air thickened, colder and heavier with each step downward, as if the darkness itself resisted their entrance. The walls were jagged, carved not by wind or water but by violence, ancient cracks shaped by weapons, fire, and something that once had enough power to scar the planet's bones. The warboss didn't slow. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even blink. He felt drawn forward by a current he couldn't name, guided not by memory. Orcs have none at birth, but by the instinct woven into every fiber of his being. The boys followed, their heavy breaths echoing off the stone, their boots grinding dust into the rock. Even the grots, though trembling, scurried after them like nervous shadows. The deeper they went, the more the canyon seemed to swallow sound. Roars faded quickly. Footsteps became dull thuds. The air felt thick, oppressive, almost watchful. And then the warboss stopped. He wasn't looking at the ground or the walls. He was staring into the darkness ahead, head tilted slightly, as if listening to a sound none of the others could hear. Something whispered through the chasm, not a voice, not a language, but a pulse. A rhythm, a power beating faintly like a dying ember waiting for a breath to ignite it. The boys sensed it too. Their aggression dimmed for a moment, replaced by an unusual stillness. Even orcs, for all their brutality, know instinctively when something important lies ahead. Their instincts do not warn them away. They pull them closer. The warboss moved again, and the tribe surged after him. The canyon widened into a vast chamber carved from the earth, a hollow cavern so large the ceiling vanished into darkness. Strange shapes jutted from the ground, fragments of old metal, twisted beams, shattered plates of armor the size of buildings. Dust blanketed everything, but beneath it, faint lines of glyphs glimmered in muted red, as if remembering a language long dead. The tribe spread out, kicking debris aside, poking at things they didn't understand. Some boys shoved each other for the right to examine broken pieces of steel. A few grots squeaked with excitement as they found scraps to hoard. But the warboss ignored them all. His gaze drifted to the center of the chamber, where the ground sloped into a circular pit. Within that pit lay the object that had whispered to him across the canyon, a massive, half-buried sphere of metal and bone, covered in fractures and engraved with symbols that pulsed faintly like the heartbeat of some colossal beast sleeping beneath the rock. The warboss approached slowly. The air around the sphere vibrated, faint but unmistakable. The closer he came, the more the boys felt a strange surge within their muscles, a tightness, a heat, like the air before a lightning strike. Something about this artifact resonated with them. Something primal. The warboss placed a hand on the sphere. The chamber reacted instantly. A shockwave of red energy burst outward, rattling stones loose from the walls, sending grots tumbling backward in terrified squeals. Dust erupted in a cloud that rolled across the cavern floor like a storm front. The glyphs etched across the metal fragments flared to life, glowing with sudden red fire that illuminated the faces of the boys with hellish light. And then it came, the sound, a low, rising vibration that grew into a deep, thunderous chant, echoing from the artifact's core. It was neither mechanical nor organic, something older, something stranger. It resonated through the orcs' bones, stirred the spores in the air, ignited the fungus on the walls with a faint electrical crackle. The boys stood stunned, their primal minds grappling with a sensation they couldn't name, not fear, not confusion, but something like recognition. This wasn't just an object. It was a relic, a memory from their ancient creators. A blueprint of violence meant to awaken something dormant within them. The warboss tightened his grip on the sphere's surface. The red glow intensified, surrounding him, painting his skin with swirling shadows. His muscles tensed, bulging beneath his thick hide, his breathing slowing into deep, steady growls. Something inside the sphere responded to him alone. And in that moment, every orc in the chamber felt a shiver of understanding. He had been chosen, not just to lead a tribe, not just to unite a band of boys, but to awaken something vast, something terrible, something that had been sleeping since before the Imperium drew its first breath. The chanting vibration ceased abruptly, echo fading into the depths. Silence fell. Then, slowly, deliberately, the sphere cracked open. A red light poured out from the fracture, bathing the warboss in a glow that made his shadow stretch across the entire chamber. The boys roared instinctively, their voices amplified by the shape of the cavern until the sound became a booming wall of fury. Images flickered inside his mind like sparks jumping between metal plates, visions without context, impressions without names. A battlefield so massive it stretched beyond the horizon. Armored giants marching in formation, each step causing the earth to tremble. Sky-shattering engines soaring above them, their wings forged from something brighter than fire. And towering above all of them, shapes of impossible stature. The Brain Boys, the ancient, legendary creators of Orks. He did not know the name, not consciously, but something in his blood recognized it. A deep instinct hummed inside his bones, vibrating in his jaw, his fists, even in the thick cords of muscle across his back. He saw glimpses of these beings shaping life as if sculpting clay, designing species-like weapons forged for a single purpose. And in the vision, the orcs were not yet green. They were concepts, designs, prototypes of war given shape by beings who needed a soldier that could outlast the stars themselves. The warboss staggered, gripping the artifact tighter as more visions tore through him. He saw vast forges floating in space, their surfaces glowing white-hot with creation energy. He saw planets molded like metal spheres hammered into shape. He saw wars between entities so powerful that reality itself bent in their presence. And then he saw the Brain Boys disappear, not dying, not fading, but collapsing into some unreachable corner of the universe, leaving only their weapons behind. Weapons like the orcs. Weapons like him. The red mist thickened again, and the vision shifted, now showing the artifact itself. He watched as ancient hands carved symbols into its shell, embedding it with a purpose he could almost grasp but not fully comprehend. Something about control. Something about awakening. Something about uniting. The artifact was not a weapon. It was a key meant to awaken something buried not in the ground, but in the orcs themselves. The vision snapped away. The warboss stumbled back, chest heaving, steam rising from his shoulders as if the memories had burned him from the inside. But he did not fall. He did not weaken. He stood taller, broader, as if the visions had compelled his body to grow. The boys stared at him in stunned silence. There was a new weight behind his eyes now, a sharpness, a brutality sharpened by awareness. He did not understand what he had seen in the way a human scholar might, but orcs do not need understanding. Instinct is their knowledge. Purpose is their language, and now, a new instinct had sunk into the warboss's soul. Gather, grow, unify, conquer. His breath rumbled out of him in a slow growl that reverberated through every orc in the chamber. The boys straightened unconsciously, spines stiffening with a readiness they couldn't explain. Even the smallest grots felt it, the change in the air, the shift in the tribe's destiny. The warboss raised his fist. A roar tore from his throat, echoing through the cavern with the force of an earthquake. The boys answered instantly, their voices rising in a deafening wave that shook dust loose from the ceiling and sent pebbles cascading down the walls. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't a cry. It was the first spark of something larger. A call to war. A call to creation. A call to destiny. The artifact pulsed once more, glowing brighter, responding to the fury in the chamber. Its symbols burned with renewed energy, and the remaining fragments around it began to vibrate, as if awakening in sympathy. The warboss stared at the sphere, knowing instinctively that its purpose was not yet complete. Its message was not fully delivered. It held more, deeper layers, locked behind something only he could unlock as he grew in power. And grow he would. He turned from the artifact and strode toward the exit of the cavern, his steps heavier, more deliberate, leaving dents in the dust-covered floor. The boys followed immediately, energized by the red ignition of violence now flickering inside their chests. Above them, the world stirred again, spores drifting, fungus spreading, the air thickening with promise. The green tide was not just rising. It was preparing. For the first time since the world had died, the planet felt alive again, trembling beneath the footsteps of beings who were born for war. And far beyond the horizon, something else, something ancient, felt the disturbance and turned its attention toward the awakening world. The orcs had discovered a memory. Now, the galaxy was about to remember them. The warboss emerged from the cavern into a landscape still blanketed in green mist and fungal growth. The air was thick with spores, carrying the raw scent of life being born in chaos, a scent that sent the boys into a frenzy. They followed their leader instinctively, forming a loose, roaring pack behind him. Every step he took seemed to thrum through the ground, vibrating in the bones of the smaller orcs, amplifying their hunger for violence. The warboss didn't need orders, didn't need maps. Orcs are born knowing the simplest truth. The strong claim, the weak obey, and everything in between is a tool or a stepping stone. His gaze swept over the blackened plains stretching to the horizon, and he felt it, the pulse of the planet, now fully awake, responding to the artifact's influence and the tribe's growing strength. Somewhere out there, beyond the mist and hills, life waited to be conquered, challenged, or destroyed. And the boys knew it too. They had felt the shift, the calling that rose from their leader, and their chants began, low, guttural, a rumble that rose from their throats and shook the very spores in the air. It was not a greeting. It was not a warning. It was a declaration. They were here. They would not stop. The Waaagh had begun. The first targets were small and scattered, abandoned settlements, broken machinery, forgotten outposts left behind by empires too proud or too distracted to notice. The boys tore through them with a primal efficiency, smashing, burning, looting, as if every scrap was a test of their might. The warboss moved among them, not as a commander but as a catalyst, every gesture amplifying their instincts, every roar binding them into a single pulse of raw aggression. But the warboss knew this was only the beginning. These minor strikes were not enough. They were practice, a way to awaken the fighting spirit and to see who among the tribe would follow without hesitation, who would falter, and who might even be worthy of higher rank. The air was alive with tension, charged, electric, ready to erupt. Then came the first true challenge, a patrol of human soldiers, sent from a nearby outpost to investigate the strange growth reported by scouts. The humans were confident, armed with rifles, grenades, and shields, believing they could maintain order against what they thought were scattered marauders. But nothing prepared them for the raw, instinctual brutality of orcs. The boys crashed into them with a single, terrifying roar. Flesh met fist, metal met claw, and the first symphony of war rang across the plains. The humans fired, screamed, and fell, but the orcs simply advanced, unstoppable, reshaping the battlefield with nothing but sheer force and the warboss's relentless presence at the center. Amid the chaos, the warboss moved with precision, each swing and strike instinctively finding the most effective targets. He did not kill indiscriminately. He killed efficiently, feeding the tribe's momentum and their growing confidence in his leadership. Every boy who followed him absorbed the lesson: the strongest live, the weak perish, and the leader shapes the destiny of all. The first strike was a test. And it was passed. The battlefield lay silent now, save for the ragged breathing of the survivors and the triumphant roars of the victorious boys. The warboss stood at the center, chest heaving, head raised, eyes scanning the horizon. This was no longer a simple awakening of a single tribe. This was the ignition of a force that would sweep across the planet, unstoppable, brutal, unyielding. Above, the sky darkened slightly, the mist twisting into shapes that seemed almost alive, as if the planet itself had drawn a breath in awe of the violence unfolding. The artifact's influence pulsed faintly from below, reminding the warboss that this was only the start. Far greater wars awaited, and far larger forces would rise to challenge them. But the orcs would not falter. They had tasted their first victory. And in the green glow of spores and blood, the tribe's roar rose once more, louder, stronger, hungrier than ever before. The galaxy had been warned. The Waaagh was no longer a whisper. It had begun. The warboss had tasted victory, and the taste burned in his veins like molten iron. The boys around him were buzzing with unrestrained energy, fists raised, chests heaving, their snarls filling the air like a storm. But the warboss knew this was only the beginning. A single strike could awaken them, but it could not define them. The world had to be claimed, reshaped, and bent to the will of the green tide. Every hill, every valley, every ruin and spore-covered plain would be theirs, or crushed beneath their boots. From the canyon, the tribe spread outward, a river of green, unstoppable and relentless. Each step they took reshaped the world itself. The fungal growth accelerated, twisting into spires and walls that seemed to anticipate the tribe's passage. The land was becoming a battlefield, but one created not by war, but by the sheer life force of the orcs themselves. Every stomp of the warboss, every roar of a boy, sent vibrations into the soil that quickened the pulses of life, echoing the rhythm of their unstoppable march. Nearby settlements, once silent and unthreatened, began to feel the presence of this rising tide. Farms, scavenger camps, and abandoned outposts were discovered and devoured by the orcs, insatiable hunger for dominance. But it was not destruction alone that defined them. Orcs thrive on conflict, yes, but they thrive on purpose, a focus that turned chaos into organization, instinct into strategy, and violence into a terrifying form of creation. The warboss paused atop a crag, overlooking a wide valley dotted with ruined machinery and shattered trees. He inhaled deeply, sensing the energy thrumming through the ground beneath him. There was potential here, the promise of more boys, more war, more growth. He could feel the pull of the artifact even now, buried somewhere deep below the surface, urging him onward, reminding him of the larger destiny waiting for the tribe. The boys gathered at his feet, sensing that he was preparing something. Their chattering ceased, replaced by a low rumble, a collective awareness that they were on the brink of something monumental. Grots scuttled nervously but faithfully, clutching shards of metal, small bones, anything they could use to contribute to the coming battle. Then, as if answering some unspoken call, more orcs began to appear. Emerging from fissures in the soil, crawling from hidden tunnels, even rising from distant forests and plains that had lain dormant under centuries of neglect. They were drawn by the warboss's presence, by the artifact's pulse, and by the growing instinct that whispered through their kindred bloodlines, follow. Fight. Conquer. Soon, the green tide was no longer a single tribe. It was a movement, a force of nature, a rolling storm of muscle, teeth, and unstoppable aggression. And with the warboss at the center, it had purpose, direction, intensity, and a terrifying promise of expansion. The first skirmishes with outside forces began to occur naturally as the Orks expanded. Patrols sent to investigate the strange green growth were met with crushing force. Soldiers found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, and overwhelmed by creatures born for one purpose alone: to fight. And they were not merely fighting for survival, they were fighting to thrive, to dominate, to prove strength at every encounter. The warboss watched each clash with satisfaction. The boys were learning, adapting, growing stronger with every blow. Even their chaotic instincts had a rhythm now, a rhythm tuned by the presence of their leader, by the pulse of the artifact, and by the raw, growing energy of the world itself. Each victory was a lesson, each defeat of an enemy a spark that ignited deeper aggression. Above the growing chaos, the skies began to darken unnaturally. Red clouds twisted over the horizon, spurred by the collective will of the Orks and the influence of the artifact. The air crackled with energy, and the ground itself seemed to pulse in time with the warboss's heartbeat. Even the most distant creatures of the planet sensed it, a rising force that could not be ignored, a storm of green that would reshape everything in its path. And in the heart of it all, the warboss knew one truth with absolute clarity: this was only the beginning. The tribe would grow. The Waaagh would spread beyond the edges of the world. And nothing, no force, no empire, no star-faring civilization, would be able to stop them once the green tide truly rose. The galaxy, unknowingly, had been given a single warning: the Orks were awake, and their hunger could not be quelled. That was the feeling that consumed the warboss as he surveyed the expanding tribe. The green tide was no longer contained within the canyon or the valleys. It stretched like a living river across the blackened plains, each orc a ripple in the unstoppable current of muscle, teeth, and rage. The boys were no longer merely followers, they had become extensions of his will, each roar, each swing, each charge synchronizing into a single, terrifying rhythm. The artifact's influence pulsed beneath the soil like a heartbeat, resonating with the warboss, urging him to grow, to strike, to conquer. And he listened. Every instinct screamed that they were meant for more than survival. They were meant to dominate, to impose their will upon every living thing that dared cross their path. Every settlement, every ruin, every patrol that crossed their path became fuel for the tribe's relentless expansion. The boys tore through them with no hesitation. Some sought scraps of metal, others fought for dominance among themselves, but all were united by a singular force: the warboss's instinctive authority. And the warboss fed on it, absorbing their energy, magnifying it, letting it shape the way the tribe moved as one. The growth was not only in numbers. The Orks themselves began to evolve in response to the tribe's collective will. Knobs emerged, larger, tougher, bolder, each challenging the boys who dared stand in their way. Mech boys appeared, tinkering with scavenged weapons and machinery, crafting devices of crude yet terrifying efficiency. And grots, small and insignificant though they seemed, multiplied with astonishing speed, providing raw labor, fodder, and tools for the larger Orks' ambitions. The warboss paused atop a spore-covered hill, his gaze sweeping across the horizon. Smoke rose from distant skirmishes, fires igniting. Under the touch of the tribe's chaotic energy, the land itself seemed alive now, bending and reshaping to accommodate the growth of the green tide. Fungal forests twisted into natural barricades, valleys widened under the pressure of movement, and the air pulsed with spores that carried the scent of imminent violence. The warboss let out a guttural roar, deep and resonant, and the tribe responded immediately. The vibration of their collective scream shook the ground, sending waves through the soil that awakened even more hidden Orks. From distant caves and forgotten fissures, creatures emerged, drawn by the growing power, drawn by instinct, drawn by the magnetic pull of a leader whose presence now defined the rhythm of their world. And still, it was not enough. The warboss sensed it, a hunger far larger than even this sprawling tribe. The artifact beneath the ground whispered of greater forces waiting, of enemies lurking in shadows, of worlds that would fall beneath their might. His instincts flared in anticipation. Every victory, every conquered patch of land, every new orc that joined the tribe was preparation for something monumental. The boys surged around him, and for the first time, the warboss let himself envision the scale of what they could become. Not just a tribe, not just a Waaagh, on a single planet, but a force capable of sweeping across star systems, a green tide that would drown civilizations in its relentless fury. He could feel it in the air, in the spores, in the very pulse of the world. The hunger was growing. And with it, so too grew the anticipation. The Orks would not stop. The Waaagh would not pause. The galaxy would soon understand that the quiet, dead worlds it had ignored were now awake, and that awakening came in the form of unstoppable green violence. The warboss let out another roar, his chest heaving, eyes glowing with an instinctive fire. The tribe responded, their collective voice shaping the wind itself, carrying across the plains and into the unknown reaches of the world. The hunger had begun, and nothing would satiate it. The warboss had awakened more than a tribe, he had awakened a living, breathing organism of destruction. Every boy, knob, and grots under his command was connected not by words, but by instinct, a language older than civilizations, older than the stars themselves. Each movement, each roar, each clash of fists was a pulse in the growing body of the Waaagh itself. The tribe began to take shape, not through planning, not through strategy, but through raw, brutal necessity. Those who were strongest rose naturally to positions of influence. Knobs flexed their muscles against weaker boys, asserting dominance, their victories amplifying their authority. Mech boys tinkered, constructing simple yet devastating devices that only heightened the tribe's effectiveness in combat. Even the grots, often overlooked, became vital in their numbers, carrying debris, scavenging resources, and unwittingly creating paths for larger orcs to dominate. The warboss observed all of it with a predator's precision. He did not dictate. He did not instruct. He guided through presence, through instinct, through the subtle pull of dominance. Every orc in the tribe felt it, whether they knew the reason or not. Their instincts were now tuned, synchronized to the rhythm of the warboss's will. The tribe moved as one, yet retained the chaotic energy that made orcs unstoppable. Encounters with minor forces became both practice and ceremony. Patrols, scavenger gangs, and lone hunters attempting to claim land or resources were torn apart. Each battle honed the boys, reinforced the knobs, and expanded the tribe's influence. With every victory, the tribe swelled in numbers and confidence. The land itself seemed to recognize the shift. Rivers of spores flowed faster, fungi sprouted into larger, denser formations, and the air buzzed with the energy of growth and violence combined. The warboss felt the pull of the artifact deep within the planet. It whispered of greater challenges ahead, of larger enemies, and of the ultimate destiny waiting beyond the horizon. The tribe's actions were preparation, a natural evolution towards something monumental. He could sense it. This was no longer merely survival or expansion. This was creation through war, organization through violence, purpose through chaos. As the tribe's structure solidified, the Waaagh began to take on an identity of its own. Roars were no longer just signals of aggression, they became calls, commands, and responses. The boys learned to anticipate, to coordinate, to act as extensions of one another.